Yeah, first a little bit of background. I'm with the Soil Carbon Coalition, and we're a nonprofit organization that we started in 2008. And this was after I attended a presentation in which the top man for the Natural Resource Conservation Service on soil carbon gave a presentation in which he said that management made no difference and that soil carbon was too hard to measure anyway. This was in 2007, I heard that, and that pushed the buttons for us to, in other words, the red light became the green light. And we started a couple of people and I started the Soil Carbon Coalition. Can I turn this thing off?
I'm trying, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And we started a program of measurement. And I'll get around to that later because I want to give you a context of the history here. And I'm going to do that by starting at the present and doing a flashback. One of the best definitions, I think, of soil health is given by the Natural Resource Conservation Service in the last 5 to 10 years in the form of principles. And there's several varieties of these, but these 5 principles are kind of the opposite of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, last time I counted, are 80% negative. These are 80% positive. And the first one is minimize tillage. This is the negative one. The second one, and obviously these can be of sort of any order, is the importance of soil cover. Litter, crop residue, mulch, whatever you want to call it. The third is diversity, and this could be implemented in terms of, say, a crop rotation or a polyculture of perennial plants or pasture cropping or something of that type. Living roots as long as possible. And last but not necessarily least, integrate livestock. As Albert Howard said in the 1930s, nature does not try to farm without animals.
Can everyone hear in the back all right?
Yes.
Good.
So, there's been lots of work on these, but I think this is a very good summary of some of the principles of soil health. And soil health might be very broadly defined as that crumb-like porous structure that enables soil to be habitat for microbes, slow release of nutrients, absorb and retain water, and produce abundant, healthy crops with a minimum of inputs. So let's go to history now. Thinking about soil health, and let's do a continuum here. This is negative on soil health, and over here is positive on soil health. Okay, so you have a continuum left to right here. And where would people put the majority of agriculture for the past, say, 8,000 years? Has it been a negative or a positive influence on soil health? Negative? Okay. Agriculture. Where has, say, in the last 80 to 100 years, and let's focus on the United States since that's what most of us are more familiar with, where has the research sector been on this continuum? And where has the input sector been? Some cases I get this kind of a diagram, but anyway. Okay, that's kind of a stereotyped picture, and it's not completely true, but I think it's the majority of the picture. For probably thousands of years, even though we don't always have good records, there have been people who have been raising food and fiber while maintaining, conserving, regenerating soil. And most of them we've never heard of. They've disappeared, and new ones crop up. How many people here have heard of Friend Sykes? Okay. He was a very innovative English farmer who did a lot for soil health, soil principles, farming with nature.
When was that?
Late 1800s. There have been a lot of these people, but mostly they have sunk without a trace. And there's been a lot of interest in moving this whole picture to the right. Soil health is something that is usually invisible to most of us. It's underground, it's out of sight. Our typical perception of soil in the United States among urban people and even many rural people is that soil is kind of an inert dance floor for the real activity, which occurs above ground, right? That's our sort of stereotype perception. But in fact, enormous flows of matter and energy move through soil, usually, again, invisibly. Enormous flows of carbon, water, enormous flows of solar energy. As Selman Waksman said in his book, Humus, humus is a principal storage of solar energy on the surface of the earth. But as we want to move this to the right, we're aware of primarily the symptoms of soil health decline. And these became extreme in the early 1900s when Hugh Hammond Bennett was growing up in North Carolina and seeing the ravages of plantation agriculture in North Carolina and Tennessee and in the plantation belts. Gullies that you could put all of the Capitol buildings in and not have nothing sticking above the top. These were reality in those days. But many people thought that soil was an inert resource that could not be destroyed and could not be renewed. And Morgan Whitney of the U.S. Bureau of Soil Surveys around this turn of the century said that. But we became increasingly aware of the symptoms of the decline of soil health. And these symptoms included, of course, erosion, blowing dust, flooding and drought, the increasing costs of agricultural production, and the loss of biodiversity, and nutrient runoff into lakes and streams and rivers. Nutrient losses. And so, since the 1930s, the USDA alone has spent hundreds of billions of dollars, almost $300 billion in soil conservation programs alone. I've asked roomfuls of USDA people whether that has moved the needle here. And although there are some reductions in the rates of erosion in the Mississippi, for example, from the no-till revolution, the general picture is that that huge expenditure has not really moved the needle much on soil health. But we continue to take aim at these symptoms. And as a result, especially with increasing climate awareness, there has resulted in a pressure to the right. We want to exert pressure onto the situation and move this to the right. But what happens when you do that? You know human nature, even with herding cattle or something like that. You'll get resistance. Okay? And many people in both sides are very much invested on this fight. Let's look at the human dynamics here. For people who have grown up in this situation, the people out here are heretics. They're traitors. And there's enormous sunk costs in staying here. And these sunk costs include brick towers full of agricultural research PhDs, alumni contributions, sports stadiums, huge markets in big iron, in big chemicals, huge markets. Years of cultural identity and tradition. And that's not to be, I think, dismissed lightly. And an enormous sense of cultural identity and pride in providing food for billions of people around the world. Enormous pride in that. And so what happens when this pressure occurs is there's going to be a lot of resistance. But how does change, and people get more and more invested in the struggle. Lots of meetings, lots of proposals back and forth. And in some ways, it just locks more and more people into this struggle. For a long time, USDA policy, whether inadvertently or inadvertently, has tended to regard farmers as donkeys, responding to the carrot or the stick. But in fact, agriculture, as I think most of you realize, is a creative enterprise that involves imagination. The people who have been out here and have staked their careers and incredible passion to do what they've done out here have largely not done it from external motivations. They've done it from internal motivations. Their commitment to their land, to the possibilities of future generations. They've done this with entrepreneurship of sunlight and water. They've done this with willingness to fail in many cases, and willingness to be leaders, not just followers. In other words, a maturity, not being all that sensitive to what other people think of them all the time. And remember, agriculture is a creative enterprise, and these people are creative. They've created a new situation, a new context. And one possibility, I think, for this motion that we need to occur is to highlight some of what these people have done. Because in my experience, we don't generally move our whole worldview, our whole perception of our situation and context solely from external motivations, from pressure from the outside. We have to have that internal yearning. As St. Exupéry said, if you want to teach people shipbuilding, don't teach them just woodworking. You have to inculcate or allow them to experience a longing for the immensity of the sea. So these people have definitely had it, and I think there's a great opportunity to increase our recognition of these, because we don't make decisions as humans based upon data. We don't make decisions on the basis of predictions usually. And yet our society spends billions of dollars on predictions of climate change, for example. Billions of dollars. We make shifts depending on our awareness of possibility. And this is almost an animal phenomenon. It's not just a rational phenomenon. A horse will jump a stream across a boggy place based upon an interior arousal about physical possibility. It's an arousal. A cat might not jump up to the top of the refrigerator, of the stainless steel refrigerator, for that bowl of cream that you've left on the top because she knows she can't do it. That's not a rational decision, it's an internal lack of arousal about that possibility. But if there's a counter midpoint, then all of a sudden that becomes possible. And we are motivated by a vivid sense of possibility. One of the things our Soil Carbon Coalition is doing is trying to put a floor under this possibility by actually measuring change over time in soil carbon. But it's as if we're addicted to being out of position here. Many people are addicted to this position, but I say that there's an alternative. Even shifting position as advocates or change agents to this perspective rather than just this perspective, where we can see the difference and participate in illuminating this possibility, even if we're not directly managing land. If we're directly managing land, we have all sorts of opportunities to engage in this kind of leadership. So this is a suggested playbook for the present and future. When we're out of position, and I'm talking in terms of livestock handling here, since that's part of my background, we may see this as a threat. But if we shift our position, I think there's a good chance that we'll see a lot more of agriculture as being able to be engaged in the opportunity. Shift the focus so that some of these heads turn, and this is happening these days. But I think this, as long as we keep up the pressure here, we'll have continued resistance. Does everybody understand that kind of dynamic? Does that fit with your experience? Okay. But I think we're very much addicted to that pressure. And so what we can do is to illuminate possibility. Anyway,
So where do consumers fit into this?
the pathways are I think difficult because we don't know, for example, nutrient density of food. Very few people test it. But to realize the extent to which soil health underlies nutrient density, mycorrhizal fungi, for example, I think most of you are aware that they help plant roots accumulate nutrients. They also filter out some toxins and heavy metals. Increasingly, with high tillage, lots of agrochemicals, we're growing plants, or growing our food crops in increasingly non-mycorrhizal environments. So we don't have that filtering intelligence contributing to nutrient density of foods. And many of us have grown up with the idea that 1 cup of cooked broccoli has so many milligrams of calcium. Just as we're grown up with this practice X does Y. Well, not necessarily. These are very complex systems with enormous variation. But the possibility exists of testing nutrient density of food and putting that into a feedback loop. Not everybody who raises grass-fed beef does a good job with their soils. Some people do an excellent job with their soils. Certifying something as this or that practice sometimes has very little to do with the actual nutrient density of that food. That's a pathway that remains to be connected. And I think that the consumer, once that pathway is connected, we have the ability for the consumer to make very intelligent choices on the basis of that. In the meantime, you have to go by practices, locality, knowing your farmer, that kind of thing.
Given your comment on the importance of fungi filtering out toxins, I haven't personally looked a whole lot into hydroponics or aquaponics, but what are your thoughts on the nutrient density of plants that are being grown in that sort of circumstance?
I haven't tested any of them. Yeah. I think it's very easy to take positions based upon a fact-free zone. And we like to do that. And I'm one of them. I like to take, it's easier, it's cognitively easier to do that, to say that this is good and this is bad. But I think we have an opportunity, and this is what I regard as the core principle of holistic management that I was trained in. Instead of managing against what we don't want, we have the opportunity, especially if we put out our data feelers like the mycorrhizic hyphae, we have the opportunity to manage for what we want and need. And that, although it might seem a semantic shift to some of you, it's a very fundamental attitudinal difference. When we manage against what we don't want, we create fragmentation, backlash, resistance, circular firing squads, the subsequent fragmentation of positions so that everybody is, the good is the enemy of the best and so forth. Whereas if we're managing for what we want and need, diversity actually becomes an asset rather than a liability. And that's a very different dynamic than deciding this is good or this is bad. I'm not going to say hydroponics or aeroponics, as some people call some of this stuff, is good or bad. It's definitely what's happening in a lot of places.
So let's give Peter a